Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I wanted to do a follow-up video here on the video I did recently called Patch 1.13 Russian Bias Confirmed, where I went through the web page, the World of Tanks news article here about the sandbox results, the new iterations, the changes to HE shells, and I gave you my point of view that this was simply another step towards confirming Russian bias in the game. I tried to make it a little bit funny, and most of the people could understand what I was trying to say, but there were still some, and I read some of the comments of people that are still not convinced and don't really see the point that I was trying to make, and I think I might have not made my point specific enough. So I'm going to explain to you in this video why I think this patch 1.13 is really going to be a massive buff to pretty much the entire Russian tech tree. That's what this new patch is. And I'm going to explain it to you. So when we went through in the previous video here, some of the results they had. Now remember, they wanted to make these changes because apparently there was a problem in the game. According to Wargaming, there was a big issue in the game. I didn't know about this issue, but apparently this was the biggest issue that they've been working on. And the issue was that HE shells were causing high frontal damage to well-armored vehicles. This was a big issue, apparently. And this is especially frustrating for commanders in vehicles featuring good frontal armor who cannot take maximum advantage of it. That was the issue. One of the issues they were trying to solve. The second issue they were trying to solve was a lack of demand for HE shells for low and medium caliber guns. Players in vehicles with low and medium caliber guns rarely use HE due to their unpredictable damage. Sometimes HE fired from these guns also cause decent damage, but this does not happen often. These were the two issues they were trying to fix. So they lowered the amount of damage that HE does on a non-penetrating hit. So what they've done, in effect, the lack of demand for HE shells in lower medium caliber guns is now going to be zero demand because they've nerfed the HE shells. So good job. You haven't fixed that problem. There is no more problem now because people will not shoot HE shells from low caliber guns. They'll just shoot premium ammo. They'll just shoot heat. Okay? And the problem of causing high damage to well-armored frontal vehicles, they've lowered that by nerfing the HE non-penetrating damage. And I went through some of the examples here. They show some examples of non-penetrating HE hits prior to patch 1.13, so the patch we're playing now, 1.12, and then how it behaved in the test server. And I did specifically look at the IS-7, and some people left comments there and said, "You, Claus, you looked at the Super Conqueror, but not the IS-7. And it is true that every tank that gets hit by HE and a non-penetrating hit from HE, that hit will do less damage. It's an all-round HE nerf to non-penetrating hits. And they go through some of the examples here. For example, the IS-7 in patch 1.12 takes an average of 374 damage per hit from HE, and in the sandbox with the nerfed HE takes 319, a reduction of 14.7%. 14.7% less damage to the IS-7 in the sandbox with the nerfed HE rounds on non-penetrating hits. If the hits penetrate, if an HE shell penetrates, it still does full damage, plus or minus 25%. So all the heavily armored tanks in the game, it is true, benefit from this HE nerf. The IS-7 benefited by close to 15% less damage. The Mouse benefited extremely by minus 28% damage. That's pretty good. The Super Conqueror benefited from non-penetrating HE hits by minus 11.3% damage. Then this is the one that I had a little a gag about, the Object 430U, minus 23.5% less damage. These are heavily armored tanks that It's very difficult to pen with HE. Most of the hits on these tanks do not penetrate, and non-penetrating hits do less damage. So how is this a massive buff to the Russian tech tree? Well, I thought that people could read between the lines and see what's going on here, and I may not have articulated it properly in my video. So let me just show you what I mean here. Let's look at SPGs, the biggest SPG gun in the game, the T92. This thing has a massive, huge gun, right? This gun can do 1,300 damage, plus or minus 25%, if it penetrates you. The HE pen is 60, plus or minus 25%. Remember, there's RNG on your penetration as well. That's what they tweak for the KV2, but that's another story. Okay, so this gun can do 1,300 damage. Well, that's a lot if it penetrates you, but it only has 60 pen. Now, this is the whole point. Which tech tree in World of Tanks has tanks that are fairly heavily armored that are difficult to penetrate with HE? Which tech tree? Well, there's a few, but let me point out one. The Russian tech tree. Now, almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all the tanks in the Russian tech tree are difficult to penetrate with HE, unless you get them, exactly in the rear, So they're difficult to pen with HE. So inadvertently in this patch, think about this, guys. Okay, I'm going to make my point now. All tanks that are heavily armored will benefit somewhat because non-penetrating HE hits will do less damage. So the Russian heavy tanks, the German heavy tanks, the Chinese heavy tanks, the Japanese heavy tanks, the American heavy tanks, not so much the French heavy tanks. Some of the more heavily armored tanks in this game will all benefit from taking less HE damage on non-penetrating hits. And that's as far as some people think. And they say, okay, well, that's good. It's an HE nerf. But my point is, those are not the tanks that are going to benefit the most from this patch. They will all benefit plus or minus about equally. Let's just say that. The tanks that are going to benefit the most are tanks like this. You roll out in an LTTB, in a tier 10 game. An LTTB, let's just look at it. It's a Russian light tank. Oh, it happens to have 90 millimeters of armor in the front. It happens to have a 90 millimeter turret. Tier 10 artillery that can do 1,300 damage shoots this tank. The shell hits the turret. It does not penetrate. The HE non-penetrating hits have been nerfed. Tank survives almost unscathed. You're driving around in your T-54 lightweight. Okay, you're driving around in your T-54 lightweight and you get hit by the biggest artillery in the game. You have a 180 millimeter turret. You have 120 millimeters on the side of your turret. You have 80 millimeters on your front plate. You've got 60 millimeters on your side. The shot doesn't penetrate. Most likely, it doesn't penetrate. You take a lot less damage from HE. This is true for the whole Russian tech tree, and it's not the heavy tanks that get the buff, although all the heavy tanks in the game and all the heavily armored tanks in the game get somewhat of a buff. My point is that the whole Russian tech tree gets a buff, especially the light tanks and the medium tanks, all of them. As opposed to, for example, you're driving around in your RU-251 trying to scout in a game, and you get hit by the T-92 artillery, which only has 60 pen, but you've got 20 millimeters of armor on your turret. You got 25. The most you have is 25. The shot pens, you take 1,480 damage because penetrating hits have not been nerfed. If you get penetrated, you still take full damage plus or minus 25%. And most of the light and medium tanks of all the other nations, if you were stupid enough to grind all the way to tier 10 in the German light tank line, congratulations, you've got 30 millimeters of armor. almost every HE round in the game is going to penetrate you. Nothing's changed for you. Okay, nothing's changed for you if you're playing the German light tanks. You're still going to probably get penetrated, and you're going to take full damage. Even some of the medium tanks, right? Even some of the tank destroyers. What about if you're playing the French tech tree? Nothing's changed for you. You're playing the AMX 13105, and you've got 50, 40 millimeters of armor. You're going to get penetrated by even artillery and some of the HE rounds that have some of the best HE rounds in the game that have 100, 103, 105 pen. You have a high chance of being penetrated. You're still going to take full damage. Nothing's changed for you. What's changed is the amount of damage that almost all the Russian light tanks and medium tanks will take, because they're typically not penetrated by HE. So before, in this patch, they'll take a certain amount of damage. In 1.13, they'll take less. So they've been buffed inadvertently. And I don't know if this is something that they didn't think about, because I think, this is what they say in their website. Let's put this back here. The whole reason that this patch is introduced, the whole point, which apparently was the most important thing to worry about in World of Tanks, and what Wargaming chose to concentrate on for this patch, was this is the problem, causing high frontal damage to well-armored vehicles. That's the problem they're trying to solve. And what they created was, some of those high armored vehicles that take frontal damage, they will all take a little less damage. But the tanks that are really going to benefit the most versus their peers are the lightly, I'm going to use this, lightly armored tanks in quotation marks, right? Those are the ones that get the buff relative to their peers, because they're going to take even less damage now from HE, whereas their peers are going to take the same amount of damage. And so it's the Russian light tanks, all the Russian medium tanks. I guess we can say that the Chinese tanks, the medium tanks. What about the light tanks, the Chinese light tanks? Let's just look at this, like a tier 9. What does it have as far as armor? No, not so much. Not so much for China. You still get pen. You know? They have 50, 25. Yeah, it's the Russian lightly armored tanks that are going to come out of this as the big winners. What about an American tank, like a Bulldog? What is a Bulldog? Right? A Bulldog, 25, 25, 90. The American light line, still susceptible to HE. If you're going to get penned, nothing's changed for you. The Sheridan may be a little bit safer, because the Sheridan is a little, for some reason, although it has no armor here, it does have some space sections, but you're going to get penned a lot in the Sheridan and take full damage. What about the British tanks? Like, do we even have to look at those? Like, what if you're playing a setter? What if you went down the British light line, or a Manticore? So my point is, most of the lightly armored vehicles in the game will continue to get penetrated by HE and take full damage, okay? But the lightly armored vehicles in the game, Russian lightly armored, that don't get penetrated by HE, will take less damage. So they've been buffed. This whole tech tree has been buffed. Inadvertently, the Russian light tanks and medium tanks have all been buffed relative to their peers. And this really, talk about a tech tree that's been nerfed with this patch. And you just have to look at the British tech tree, because there's some tanks where the speciality of the tanks, for example, the British mediums, like the Centurion, whose speciality in the gun is the Hesh, and the cheap Hesh and the expensive Hesh. So one of the ways that you play the British mediums is, if you can't penetrate people frontally, you load HE, the cheap HE, still has a really good round. 105 penetration, 480 damage. Or you can spend more and load HESH, 210 pen and 480 damage. And you were always assured in your British, not just the medium tanks, but the tanks that get HESH, that you would do some damage. And you could do a lot of damage to some tanks with, even if you didn't penetrate your HESH or your HE. These rounds have been nerfed now. If you fire HESH with 210 pen and you happen to hit that magical spaced armor pixel that you would have hit before, and in patch 1.12 you would have done 312 damage, well, now you're going to do 205 damage. And for your regular HE round, shooting Russian tanks, you're probably not going to ever pen even a light tank. Unless you carefully aim at his rear. You shoot the regular HE round at a T-54 lightweight, you're not going to pen. You're going to do less damage now. So this whole, all the tanks, the British tanks that rely on HESH, some of the ones that have the big guns, this round is useless now, right? You can't play this tank a la cheap anymore, because your HE round with 92 pen, 1,750 damage, most of your shots you take with that 92 pen are not going to penetrate. So this 1,750 average damage has been nerfed. So you're going to have to spam the expensive HESH, the 230 pen, 1,750. And that's been nerfed as well, because we all know that when you play this thing, it's very rare that your rounds pen. A lot of times you're going, because of the accuracy of the gun, your shot deviates, it hits a track pixel, it hits something that it doesn't penetrate. You rely on that big splash damage. Well, now you're going to do less damage. So the British tech tree, I think, has been all round nerfed, because it's the tech tree that the speciality is the HESH and the HE. And the Russian tech tree has been all around buffed. And it's a little counterintuitive, and the reason I wanted to make this video was because I think people look at the results on that World of Tanks webpage, and the title is Nerfed HE Round because the problem they were trying to fix was causing high frontal damage to well-armored vehicles. So people are thinking, well, well-armored vehicles, heavy tanks, yes, they will take less damage now. And that's as far as they take the analysis. And it is true, all heavily armored vehicles will take less damage now. But I don't think that's where we're going to see the biggest impact of this patch. Where we're going to see the biggest impact is on the lightly armored vehicles, in quotations, that are still hard to penetrate with HE. All the Russian tanks. The tanks you don't penetrate with HE, the reason you shot HE at them was to try and do some damage, and now your non-penetrating HE hits will do less damage. This is just a complete buff of the Russian, the whole Russian tech tree, basically, which is the heavily armored tech tree. I don't know if this was just an inadvertent something they didn't think about, that the statistics will come out in the coming months. Well, they'll say, "Oh, Yuri, we have noticed that all Russian medium tanks and light tanks are taking a lot less damage now. We have succeeded." Or this is a problem. We don't know. I don't know whether it's just a dumb mistake, or whether it's something they didn't think of, because they didn't really think of how is this change going to affect these light and medium tanks. They're mainly thinking about the heavy tanks. Or whether it was a calculated buff to the Russian tech tree line, because the feedback they got was that the Russian player base is complaining that they're taking damage in their tanks from HE spam in the game. A lot of the other nations rely on good HE rounds. Some of the German light tanks have good HE rounds. The British tech tree, good HE rounds. Right? So the Polish heavy tanks, good HE rounds. The Japanese heavy tanks used to have really good HE rounds, now just has a okay HE round. maybe the Russian player base was complaining that these other nations are spamming HE and they need to be buffed. So rather than buff them outright, this is kind of a reverse sneaky Russian reach around way of buffing the entire Russian tech tree. That's my opinion. I'd be interested in hearing your comments in the comments section. Let me know what you guys think. But think and try and read between the lines. It's not just about the heavy tanks. And I will say, yes, all the heavy tanks in the game, all the heavily armored tanks that typically do not get penetrated by HE will see less damage, and they're pretty much on a level playing field. They'll all see less damage. But where we're going to see the big differences are the tanks that can not be penetrated by HE, and they will see a huge benefit with respect to their peers, similar tanks from other nations that they compete against. And that's the Russian medium tanks, Russian light tanks, and a few other ones. I'm sure you guys are going to correct me. Klaus, you didn't mention the one Chinese medium tank that's going to also benefit. Well, okay, yeah, and I'll have a cookie. But in general, I'm talking big picture here. This whole tech tree benefits from this 1.13 update. Let me know what you guys think. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'm gonna be interested in reading all the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. Okay, I will read them all, and I'll catch you on the next one.